It's time for the Bible Geek.
Robert M. Price. We don't really know for sure what is and what is not.
Holy Ghost.
God, fantastic. God blasted him on the spot.
Ghost.
Yes, friends, it's time for the Bible Geek. Interpretation. Star. Jesus. Homiletical. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John.
At long last, another exciting episode of the Bible Geek with your distinctly unexciting host, Robert M. Price, the geek himself. Haven't been with you for a little while because I've been working like heck on the book, Holy Fable, the Bible Undistorted by Faith. I'm getting not real close, but sort of close to the end. I've done things out of the canonical order in the New Testament. I'm pretty much done with the Pauline epistles, the pastoral epistles, the general epistles, Hebrews, and I'm maybe 2/3 through with the book of Revelation. Then I'm going to do the Gospels and Acts, and that's quite a lot, quite a tall order, but I'm feeling pretty good about getting it done before too long. But I am cheating other things, and I'm afraid the Bible Geek has been one of them. I'm sorry about that, but here we go. Let's have some fun with the old rain barrel. Here's a question from Abdel Daoud, first prophet of the Aten. There is a construction in Matthew which never fails to strike me as strange whenever I hear or read it. It may be my OCD asserting itself, or it may be a poetic emphasis, but even before I began to understand some of Matthew's polemics, I thought it was odd. Matthew 5:17 through 19, New American Standard Bible. Do not think I came to abolish the law of the prophets. I did not come to abolish, but to fulfill. For truly I say unto you, until heaven and earth pass away, not the smallest letter or stroke shall pass from the law until all is accomplished. Whoever then annuls one of the least of these commandments and teaches others to do the same shall be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever keeps and teaches them, he shall be called great in the kingdom of heaven. There is only one least. There may be multiple lessers, and my assumption is that this should be understood as shall be among the least in the kingdom of heaven. But the phrase shall be called least has always implied to me that Matthew is condemning an individual rather than a school of thought. Is that a possibility, or is this simply an elegant way of saying one of the least? It seems significant that those who do teach the law are not the greatest, but merely great, that is, among the greatest. Now I understand that Matthew is targeting Paul's. Now that I understand that Matthew is targeting Paul's teaching, is it possible that his construction is aimed at Paul himself, and that Matthew is naming Paul as the least in the kingdom of heaven? May the black sun forever curse you with wisdom. Abdel Daoud, first prophet of the Aten. Let's see. I think it probably does just mean, as a group, those who teach the doctrine that is implied in verse 17, do not, I got the wrong voice here, do not think that I came to abolish the law of the prophets. Now, who would be saying that? That the mission of Jesus, I came to do so-and-so, was to abolish the law and the prophets. That implies this is a rival Christian doctrine, right? But don't you believe it? That's the point of that. So some are saying that, and it says whoever teaches that, whoever annuls one of the least of these commandments, and so on. That, I think, is singular, right? And therefore it says such a one is the least in the kingdom of heaven. So I think if you want the bottom shelf, folks, this is the way to get it. But you never know. I mean, you could be right just as easily, because later on in the parable of the wheat and the tares, the enemy has sown the tares. That's almost got to be Paul. So it could be that here. However, this gets into a real briar patch, because you have to wonder if the keynote statement there of the Sermon on the Mount is not aimed at Marcionite Christians. And of course, Paul would be implicated. But who in the early church advocated abolishing not just the law, now that's Paul, but the law and the prophets? You don't have that in the Pauline epistles as we now read them anyway, right? To say the law and the prophets is to say, some would say Jesus came to abolish the scriptures. Now, would that be even Paul? I mean, he loves quoting from the prophets and so forth. So I suspect we're dealing with a edition by Polycarp, the ecclesiastical redactor, enlisting the original anti-Paulinism elsewhere evident in Matthew to serve as a polemic against his Polycarp's hated foe, Marcion. So it may be Marcion that's intended there. But this is all maybes, right? There's no way to dogmatize on this stuff. Yeah, good sharp eye there. Chuck Quino in Fairbanks, Alaska. He says, future presidential advisor on biblical criticism. I only wish. I read in a somewhat unreliable source, Robert Heinlein's Job, A Comedy of Justice, never read it, I'm sorry to say, that the original meaning of Exodus 22:18, like, thou shalt not suffer a witch to live, was something like poisoner rather than witch. Comparing other translations online, female sorcerer seems to be prevalent. Well, what is this? Politically correct pressure from Wicca? Anyway, modern concepts of witchcraft seem to mix vaguely pagan traditions with notes of Satanism. Devil worship seems to be an anachronistic idea to the author of Exodus, but what about the pagan aspect? Is 22:18 aimed at indigenous religions of the northern kingdom? Or do modern readers miss the original meaning completely? Can you weigh in on the tradition of witchcraft and modern corruptions of ancient paganism? Well, for one thing, the point in Exodus, I think, is spirit mediums. And the Witch of Endor is a later example, right? What is it that the woman is doing that has resulted in her profession being outlawed in the days of Saul? Right? And so that when he seeks her out, he has to go in disguise because he doesn't want to frighten her, though she does know who he is through some sort of supernatural insight. He is seeking out like a spirit medium, like the seance medium kind of. I mean, that goes way, way back. It doesn't say she's a pagan or a member of some Canaanite religion, but you have to keep it. So she could have considered herself an Israelite. She might have been an Israelite. In Isaiah, it says, should a people consult the dead on behalf of the living instead of consulting their God? Well, that's exactly, I think, the idea of the ban on witches, mediums. It does. Now, Isaiah sort of implies that this is the general practice, necromancy, right? Fortune telling or telling the future by means of the dead. That's what the Witch of Endor does, right? She summons up the shade of Samuel from Sheol, and not permitting them to live is a way of cornering the market on divination. And that's what the Exodus passage is doing, that's what the Isaiah passage is doing, and that's what the 1 Samuel passage presupposes. This is the same instinct, by the way, that led people to frame a canon of Scripture with strict boundaries. We want to delimit the possible sources of revelation. If you have these Gnostic Gospels in your canon of Scripture, then you're going to find sources for a lot of ideas considered crazy by so-called orthodoxy, so we don't want those available. Let's burn them. Same thing here. Let's outlaw this rival channel of divination. Now, there were legitimate Yahwist, if you want to call it that, channels of divination. There was the ephod, which was some kind of a priestly breastplate or perhaps an image. It's a little difficult to tell what is implied, but it's some sort of oracular device. And then there were the Urim and Thummim, a couple of stones, apparently black on one side, white on the other, or one black and one white. I got a modern mock-up of those right over there next to my miniature Book of Mormon plates. And see, you could ask a question that way. And the priest, or who was the oracle, Kahin in Arabic and Kohen in Hebrew, mean either priest. That's why all Jews with the name Cohen supposedly go back to Levitical priestly houses, Kohen. But it also means soothsayer, as in the Quran. No, your companion is not mad, nor is this the utterance of an accursed devil. He's not a kahin, in other words, who gets revelations from the jinn, the desert spirits. And the same word, it's cognate, means either priest or oracle monger, because they were the same thing at one point. And so they were the legitimate diviners or fortune tellers, like when they go to Samuel, the Nabi, to the seer, to ask where the heck Saul's father's donkeys have run off to. Kind of reminds me of just this morning when I opened the door to a pair of Jehovah's Witnesses, and Pixie, my cat, ran out, which is always a nuisance because she climbs the tree and then scratches on my daughter's window to get back in. And so, but miracles, maybe Jehovah's Witnessism is true, because I saw a miracle. Pixie came right back in. Astonishing. Anyway, how the heck did I get off on that? The priests were soothsayers, and the lost donkeys, the lost cat, that was it. So that, I think, is what is being condemned. There's something to what Heinlein is saying. I don't know that the word in Hebrew does imply poisoner, but in the New Testament, especially, really just the book of Revelation, I guess, when it condemns sorcery or witchcraft, it's the word pharmakeia, which can mean apothecary in the Romeo and Juliet sense, a druggist who also deals in poison, which is why in my pre-Nicene New Testament, Human Bible New Testament, when it says that the sorcerers are banned from the New Jerusalem, I take it to mean drug dealers. And that's... so he's got a point, but I don't really see that implied in Exodus. Modern concepts of witchcraft, this gets into another hornet's nest, because it looks like that the medieval witches were just wise women. They knew, they were like shamans, right? They knew medicines and herbs, natural medicines and all of that. And perhaps they cast curses on people. That's part of popular religion everywhere. It wouldn't have to have been part of either Satan worship, and that's but the Malleus Maleficarum, the witch's hammer, the handbook of the Inquisitors, that builds up a lot of probably spurious lore about witchcraft by systematizing confessions tortured out of so-called witches. You were having sex with the devil, weren't you? What was it like? Well, anything you say, just take off the thumb screws, right? So they probably asked him leading questions. Oh, yeah, sure, that's right, anything you say. So that's notoriously unreliable. There have been Satan worshipers, there still are, and I don't mean the religious humanist type Satanists, the Church of Satan, the Temple of Set. That's really a whole different thing. But there have been people who actually believed in a metaphysically real Satan and worshipped him. But I don't know how far that goes back. It's possible there were witches' Sabbats where they really did worship Satan. It's really difficult to say because the evidence has been so screwed up. But I think it is equally tenuous to go the Margaret Murray route, witchcraft in Western Europe, where she says that they did worship a horned figure, but it was the horned god. It was an ancient Pan-like deity. It could be, but I think she's just sort of doing an almost euhemeristic take on medieval Inquisition belief about witches. Okay, they were worshiping a guy with a prominent penis and a couple of horns, but it wasn't Satan. It was the horned god of nature. It was Pan or whatever. I can't think of the name they usually use. Cernunnos or something. I don't know. But I think, again, that's possible, but I don't see any particular reason to think so. Just like in ancient Israel, people didn't, especially on the grassroots level, have some sort of strict systematic theology. Just like in Buddhism, there are books written about popular Buddhism where the people still worship ancestors, spirits, and Hindu gods along with the Buddha, and so that it's almost a kind of an anachronism to retroject these abstractions, these textbook types into the history of it. So I don't know if we know enough about ancient witchcraft to know if anybody has reconstructed it accurately today, whatever it was. The Wicca people, it's clear they have kind of winged it, taken their stand on Margaret Murray's theories, which again are not ridiculous, but I think quite dubious. And then they start making stuff up, basically, in a very creative way. And these things are traditions in the sense that they're handing them on. But I think modern witchcraft really is a modern attempt to speculate on what magic was and to reproduce it or update it. Yeah, so I guess that's too much about that. Thanks, Chuck. Martin Gatt says, since you agree with Richard Carrier's theory regarding the heavenly Jesus, which the early Christians, in quotes, because, sort of a proto-Christian idea, might originally have come up with, could you provide evidence from the few Pauline letters which may refer to the celestial Jesus? Yeah, there's a couple of passages that are very suggestive of this. Let's see, 1 Corinthians has this fascinating statement. Let's see, in 2:6, among the mature we do impart wisdom, although it is not a wisdom of this age or of the rulers of this age who are doomed to pass away. These all become, or if they're not already, technical Gnostic terms. The mature, the teleoi, the perfect, wisdom, Sophia, the rulers, the archons of this age, who are doomed to pass away. But we impart a secret and hidden wisdom of God, which sounds kind of Gnostic, which God decreed before the ages for our glorification. None of the rulers, archons, of this age understood this, for if they had, they would not have crucified the Lord of glory, doxa, a big mystery religion term for the transfiguration of the redeemed. But as it is written, and we don't really know where he's quoting this from, it looks a little like something in Isaiah, but not really. What no eye has seen, nor ear heard, nor the heart of man conceived, what God has prepared for those who love him, ... God, and a quote, God has revealed to us through the Spirit. For the Spirit searches everything, even the bathoi, the deep things, the depths of God. For what person knows a man's thoughts except the spirit of the man which is in him? So also no one comprehends the thoughts of God except the Spirit of God. Now we have received not the spirit of the world, but the Spirit which is from God, that we might understand the gifts bestowed on us by God. And we impart this in words not taught... What am I doing? Not reading this. Is Paul Lind. Boy, too long. We impart this in words not taught by human wisdom, but taught by the Spirit, interpreting spiritual truths to those who possess the Spirit. Then it goes on more in this Gnostic direction. Now, who was it who did in Jesus, who crucified the Lord of glory? The archons of this age. Now, I grant the rulers of this age or this world could be understood as Caiaphas, Pilate, Herod, and so on. And that wouldn't be much of a stretch because, of course, they believed that there were angelic/demonic powers behind the thrones of earthly rulers, right? The principalities and powers. So if it's assumed that it was Pilate, Herod, etc., then the powers of this age, the rulers of this age, could have put them up to it, right? Okay, that does make sense. But it's intriguing that it is not put that way here. The first time you hear any mention of Pilate is in, I think, the very late First Timothy. So you got to wonder, do you have any right to harmonize this epistle with the Gospels? People have done that for a long time on many points and assumed that Paul knew pretty much everything that was in the Gospels, but there is such an absence, such a crashing silence about all Gospel materials in these letters that I don't think you can assume that. In fact, I have to wonder if a passage like this got reinterpreted in the process of historicizing Jesus. The archons of this age, you mean Pilate, etc. So if it's not them, in what sense, how did the archons of this age crucify Jesus? Well, as my late friend Acharya S. D.M. Murdoch used to point out, the ancient astronomers saw the the crossing of the equinox and I can never keep the stuff straight, and the ecliptic as a cross in heaven. It sure wouldn't be unlikely if that's what they had in mind. In fact, I'm just drawing upon Bruce Molina's fascinating book on the genre and message of Revelation, where he shows that almost the whole thing is based on ancient astrology. It's astounding, so that the earthly events predicted in the book are earthly counterparts to the motions of stars and constellations in the heavens. Fascinating. And so as above, so below. And now you could say that there was this crucifixion in heaven that was mirrored on a literal cross of wood on earth. But again, what does the passage say? You can't just assume that here this writer believed that there was literally a crucifixion on earth. Might have been, but just because the other sounds odd, because we've never heard that it's fanciful or improbable. Now, here's another one in the letter to the Colossians, heavily Gnostic. If I got this right, yeah, let's see. 2:8 and following. See to it that no one makes a prey of you by philosophy and empty deceit, according to human tradition, according to the elemental spirits of the universe, and not according to Christ. For in him the whole fullness of deity dwells bodily, and you have come to fullness of life in him, who is the head of all rule and authority. In him you were also circumcised with a circumcision made without hands, by putting off the body of flesh in the circumcision of Christ. And you were buried with him in baptism, in which you were also raised with him through faith in the working of God, who raised him from the dead. And you who were dead in trespasses and the uncircumcision of your flesh, God made alive together with him, having forgiven us all our trespasses, having canceled the bond which stood against us with its legal demands. There's the Torah. This he set aside, nailing it to the cross. Now that's fascinating. It's like the titulus, right? The placard nailed to the cross saying this guy was a thief, this guy was a brigand, this guy claimed to be king of the Jews. What's on the cross? The Torah's regulations. Not exactly like the Gospels there. He disarmed the principalities and powers and made a public example of them, triumphing over them in him, Christ, or it, the cross. What is going on there? He disarmed the principalities and powers on the cross. What sort of a historical scenario is this? In fact, this is just redolent with several Gnostic terms, all authority and power and rule and all that stuff. Did the principalities and powers crucify Christ? Well, kind of sounds like it. Now, again, they might have been the ones wielding the unwitting tools of earthly rulers, but it doesn't say that. Right? So, these are some of the things that the mythicist reading of the epistles say that lead some of us to think that the writer didn't believe in any historical Jesus. There's another one in Revelation which says that that the Lamb shed his blood at the foundation of the world. Well, I tell you, that sounds more and more like Gaiamard in Zoroastrian myth, or Purusha in the Rig Veda, who sacrifices himself in order to create the world. From that depends and descends the Gnostic view that the material universe came to life and into motion once the archons of this age captured and destroyed the primal man of light and used his divine essence, his sparks or photons of divinity, as I like to say, to give life to this world. I think this has been historicized in the historical crucifixion of Christ. I mean, a story of such, not that it necessarily happened. So there are passages in and out of the canon that could easily be read this way. Now, again, I'm the first to say, who knows what these guys intended, right? But when you find passages that don't seem to make a lot of sense in terms of the conventional assumptions, unless you start twisting them to make them fit, well, once you notice you're doing that, you better say, hold on, maybe there's more to this text than I have been taught. So, I can't get rid of the sinus problem. So, thanks, Martin. I hope that's helpful. You can wake up now. Richard Dickton, I guess that's pronounced. Acts tells us that Paul was a Pharisee and that before his conversion he hunted down and arrested Christians. Can you tell me what type of Christians they were? For example, were they Docetists or Gnostics or another type? Well, with Ernst Henken and various others, I think that is, as with most of the book of Acts, fictional. There's big problems with that. One of the biggies being that there is no way anybody in the Sanhedrin could have given a delegate powers to go kidnap, arrest, torture people in Syria. There's not a chance. They had no such jurisdiction. So it's impossible on the face of it. I have the theory, I'm sure others have come up with it before, that originally the notion of Paul persecuting Christians of any kind was an unwitting, I guess, distortion of the original understanding of Ebionites and Jewish Christians who believed Paul was an apostate from Judaism and trying to destroy it, much the same way Orthodox Jews feel about Reform Jews, much less Christians, that they view themselves as the real Christians, and they viewed Paul as some kind of an apostate or a fake. And the way Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio are saying Donald Trump is a fake Republican, right? It's always this. The communists used to do this, right? The Soviets said the Chinese were revisionists, and then the Maoists said the same thing about the Stalinists. I mean, you're not the real thing, we are, right? So the Ebionites are saying that Paul is opposing real Christians like us. Now, all that denoted was he's preaching a different gospel, and it's a false teaching. And so he is pursuing and persecuting the truth, the gospel. I think that was later misunderstood when those battles were largely past. People read that stuff to say, you mean Paul was not a Christian and was persecuting Christianity per se? Well, then he must have gotten converted and switched sides, because they didn't understand the nuances of the original debate. Well, so I think the whole thing represents a distortion. But Luke, who is on the other side of that distortion, he's inherited that version of it, he does pretty much specify who he means to depict Paul before his conversion persecuting, and that would be Hellenistic Christians like the Seven in Jerusalem. Stephen, Nicanor, Nicolaus, Philip, and the others, right? These guys believed, apparently, from what Acts says, that the temple was unnecessary and so forth, and that it was okay to preach to Gentiles as well as Jews. This is what, even in Luke's version, gets Paul upset, along with the Sanhedrin, of whom he is some sort of flunky, or depicted that way in Acts. And it says a persecution broke out against everybody but the apostles. Now, that's interesting. As Bauer and Kuhlman and others have said, that has to mean that it was just the Hellenistic Christians, not the ones who were still Pharisaic-type Jews, who were persecuted. And I think that is correct. And who are Paul's enemies in Antioch? It's the synagogue of the freedmen and so on. So it's Hellenistic Jews. So that's what Luke intends, though, again, I think it is not historical. Boy, I'm going to have fun doing the Acts chapter in Holy Fable. By the way, was Paul a Pharisee? I tend to think that that's part of the legend. Chaim Maccabee, in books like The Myth Maker and Paul and Hellenism, very much worth reading, he says that Acts is basically historical and that Paul really did write all the epistles attributed to him, but that Paul was not a Pharisee. He's just lying about it. I think that that's almost the old rationalism. Right? You want to keep the integrity of as much of the evidence as you can, but change the explanation of it. I think it's just clear that the notion of Paul as a Pharisee, or even an ex-Pharisee, represents the Catholicizing second century tendency that Bauer pointed out. Acts makes Paul a partisan and an observer of the law, the very opposite impression we get from the letters. And I think it's trying to make Paul more Jewish because Luke's faction of Christianity has embraced the Old Testament, at least de jure. Whether they're actually keeping it or not, no, I guess not. But I think that's really what's going on there. The historical Paul, whoever he was, and as you probably know, I think he was Simon Magus, was no Pharisee and had never been one. Okay, let's see. David S. in Seattle. I'm currently reading Against Celsus, or Celsus if you prefer, C-E-L-S-U-S, really I think it's Celsus, and I came across a passage I was hoping you could give your thoughts on. In chapter 63 of Book 2, Celsus brings the following charge against the gospel narrative. And by the way, if you don't know, if you're not familiar with this very interesting ancient book by Origen, written, I guess, about 75 years after the Middle Platonist Celsus wrote The True Word, criticizing Christianity. So Origen wrote a refutation decades later. Okay, and he preserves big chunks of Celsus's original so that you can reconstruct at least a kind of Reader's Digest version of Celsus's work, and that's what is referred to here. The Celsus passages preserved in Origen. Okay, Celsus brings the following charge against the gospel narrative. If Jesus desired to show that his power was really divine, he ought to have appeared to those who had ill-treated him, and to him who had condemned him, and to all men universally. In response, Origen agrees that Jesus was not seen after his resurrection in a public manner. He then quotes Paul in Corinthians saying, "For I delivered unto you first of all that which I also received, how that Christ died for our sins according to the Scripture, and that he was seen of Cephas, and then of the 12. After that he was seen of above 500 brethren at once, of whom the greater part remain unto the present time, but some are fallen asleep. After that he was seen of James, then all the apostles, and last of all he was seen of me also, as of one born out of time." Maybe I can do a better Paul Lind when I get rid of this cold. So far so good. Here's the part that interested me. Next, Origen comments on this passage in Corinthians saying, "I'm of the opinion now that the state..." Now this is Origen, not Celsus, right? Saying, "I am of the opinion now that the statements in this passage contain some great and wonderful mysteries, which are beyond the grasp not merely of the great multitude of ordinary believers, but even of those who are far advanced in Christian knowledge, and that in them the reason would be explained why he did not show himself after his resurrection from the dead in the same manner as before that event." End of quote. What are these mysteries? Origen goes into almost docetic notions in his attempted expansion on this passage, even saying that the necessity of the kiss of Judas proved Jesus did not always have the same appearance. Could this passage be mysterious, quote unquote, because the post-resurrection appearances of Jesus were early on never thought to be anthropomorphic versions of him like they're thought to be by modern Christians? It seems to me Origen would have no reason to consider such a cut and dry testimony of appearances as mysteries unless there was something about them that did not match up with our traditional idea of an appearance. That's a good question. You know, that Origen says that Jesus did appear differently to the risen Jesus appeared differently to different people depending on their state of spiritual perception and acuity. And this is a way, I think he seems to be trying to explain the three or four references where in the resurrection narratives it says they didn't recognize him. Now, that is really a fascinating element that occurs again and again. In John 21, Jesus is on shore close enough to shout and be heard, and suddenly the beloved disciple says, "It is the Lord." Well, they didn't recognize him at first. He appears to two disciples heading back to Emmaus, and they're walking miles with the guy and don't know who he is, though they're disciples. Right? And in John 20, the resurrected Jesus appears to Mary Magdalene, who doesn't know it's Jesus. She thinks it's the gardener. In the Markan appendix, he appeared in another form. Now, that's interesting. Now, that's not original text, but we're just talking about, early resurrection traditions. That one doesn't say they were kept from recognizing him, but that they couldn't because he didn't look the same. What is going on? Well, there's some really fascinating and plausible theories. The mistaken identity theory, and that some followers of Jesus, Essenes or whatever, dressed in white like James the Just and the Essenes and so on, appeared to the disciples to tell them that Jesus had risen or they thought he had or whatever. And these guys later thought, wait a minute, could that have been Jesus? Which is sort of wish fulfillment, but it's plausible psychologically. And let's see, there's a similar theory, a little better, that says what's really going on there is these stories are about the itinerant preachers of the gospel, the itinerant radicals, the wandering charismatics, etc., of whom Jesus says, "He who hears you hears me. He who receives or welcomes you welcomes me." And think of the sheep and the goats. You didn't lift a finger to help me. What do you mean, Lord? We never saw you in the gutter and starving and sick. Sure you did. When you saw the least of these my brethren in such straits, that was me. Well, maybe that's what the resurrection narratives mean, that they're about people understanding, because they accept the gospel message, that the preachers of the gospel are really Jesus in the form of his followers. That makes a lot of sense to me. But, I also kind of like James M. Robinson's theory that, and this I kind of think is more what Origen had in mind, that if you deem something like the description of the appearance of Jesus to Paul on the Damascus Road as at least preserving what how some imagined a resurrection appearance, it was just blinding light and a voice. And there's some evidence for that in the appearance of the angel of Jesus in the beginning of the book of Revelation and in Gnostic sources. And Robinson thinks, now we're not talking about John A.T. Robinson, a great New Testament scholar as well, but James M. Robinson, a disciple of Bultmann, he says that he thinks they didn't recognize him is a vestige of this earlier stage where it was just a blinding light, almost like Moses in the burning bush, and that though the gospel stories tend to concretize these appearances and make them at least analogous to pre-crucifixion appearances of Jesus, showing them his wounds and all that, that the initial non-recognition is a holdover from that earlier stage. That makes an awful lot of sense, and Origen, I think, is probably referring to that, only he is willing to take them all at face value. And he's saying, well, whatever Paul saw, it wasn't a guy standing there with wounds in his hands. It was a blast of light. And these others, again, didn't recognize him immediately. That implies he appeared in different forms to people who had different lenses on, which is pretty fascinating. Now, this is, as you say, kind of docetic, because in the preaching of John, a part of the Acts of John, John, son of Zebedee, is pictured as reminiscing about how it was to be with Jesus. And he says the first time he and his brother met Jesus, when he called them away from their nets to be disciples, he and his brother James were trading descriptions of this guy on the shore calling to them. And John says to James, "Who is this young kid calling us?" And James says, "Well, I don't see anybody like that. I see an old man." And then they rub their eyes, and John says, "Well, he's gone now, but I do see a kind of a middle-aged, paunchy, balding guy," and so on. And eventually they realize it's Jesus seen in different forms. The Acts of Peter has a similar thing where a bunch of the consecrated widows pray and see visions of Jesus, and there are loads of them, and he looks different in form to all of them. So what Origen, who was sort of half a Gnostic, like his mentor Clement of Alexandria, Origen is sort of just saying that, what do they call it? Polymorphism of the Savior, which is something you see among the Greek gods too. That was the case after the resurrection, because what does 1 Corinthians 15 say? The last Adam became a life-giving spirit. You wouldn't expect him to be the same. And so, but some did see him in human form, right? Well, hence different levels of spiritual apprehension. So I think that's what's going on there. He may not mean more than that, though that's enough. Pretty fascinating. This is one reason we don't speak of Saint Origen. That's kind of a... I mean, that's not my opinion, right? But I think he belongs with the big names, but he was sort of considered a heretic in a number of ways. Well, I better get going. Got a visitor coming in. Got to get this thing all sealed up and sent off. But I hope to speak to you again a little sooner than the gap last time. The old Geek and his family are typically in the red. If you can help us, I sure would appreciate your contribution to this ministry. But if not, what the heck, keep listening. I will see you soon, and though I've got a bunch of them, keep sending in those great questions. So see you next time on the next exciting episode of the Bible Geek.